Hello and welcome. It is time to leave the day behind, to let go of its thoughts, its worries, and its pace. Find the position that feels most comfortable for you right now and allow your body to grow heavy, sinking softly into the surface beneath you. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and let's take a slow breath. Together, a deep breath in, filling your lungs, and a long, slow breath out, releasing the day, just like that. Tonight, we will take a gentle journey into the past. There is nothing for you to do, nothing to figure out. Simply allow my voice to be a guide, and let the story gently wash over you. If a thought comes to mind, just notice it, and let it drift away. It's perfectly all right if your mind wanders, and it is perfectly all right if you drift off to sleep before our story ends. In fact, that is what we hope for. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the currents of time carry you softly towards a deep and peaceful rest. In the heart of an emerald island, veiled by the warm mists of the Indian Ocean, grows a slender, unassuming tree. Today, we call this island Sri Lanka, but in the echoes of time, it was known by many names: Lanka, Serendib, Ceylon. Here, in the quiet, humid forests where the sunlight dapples through a dense canopy of leaves, the story of cinnamon begins, not with a sound, but with a scent. The air itself is soft and heavy with the fragrance of 1,000 growing things, of damp, dark earth, of sweet, overripe fruits falling silently to the forest floor, and of the rich, spicy perfume of unseen blossoms. But underneath it all, woven into the very fabric of the atmosphere, is the warm, woody, and intensely aromatic fragrance of the cinnamon tree. Cinnamomum verum, the true cinnamon. For countless generations, the tree lived its life in quiet obscurity, its secret held close by the island's lush geography. Its leaves, oval and glossy, would rustle in the gentle monsoon breeze, their surfaces catching and reflecting the filtered light like shards of green glass. Its flowers, small and pale, would bloom in delicate clusters, their subtle scent a mere whisper compared to the potent magic held within their bark. The tree was not majestic like the towering hardwoods, nor did it offer the immediate bounty of a fruit tree. Its value was hidden, a subtle gift waiting to be discovered by a patient hand. The knowledge of how to unlock this gift was a legacy, passed down not in written words, but in practiced movements from one generation to the next. The harvest was a ritual of quiet understanding between humanity and the forest. It did not happen in a rush, but was dictated by the rhythm of the rains. After the monsoon had passed, when the air was still thick with moisture and the sap was running high within the trees, the time was right. Men would move through the forest, their bare feet making little sound on the mossy ground. They knew the trees not by sight alone, but by a deeper familiarity. They looked for young, vigorous shoots, no thicker than a person's finger, that grew in dense thickets from the base of the parent trees. The health of the forest depended on this careful selection, a culling that encouraged new growth and ensured the harvests of future years. There was a sense of gratitude in the work, a recognition that the forest's generosity was not limitless. With a small, curved knife honed to a perfect edge, the harvester would make 2 parallel cuts down the length of a chosen shoot. A third and fourth cut would circle the shoot at the top and bottom, creating a neat rectangle of bark. Then, with a skill born of endless repetition, the harvester would gently pry the bark away. The inner layer, the phloem, was the prize. It came away from the wood with a soft, satisfying release, the dampness of the fresh sap cool against the fingers. In this moment, the forest would offer up its most potent perfume. The scent of the freshly cut bark was intoxicating, sweeter, spicier, and more complex than the dried spice would ever be. It was the living essence of the tree. These delicate sheets of inner bark, pale and pliable, were then gathered. The outer bark, rough and worthless, was scraped away with methodical, practiced strokes. What remained was a paper-thin shaving, which was laid out on a clean mat in a shaded, well-ventilated hut. The process of drying was as crucial as the harvest itself. It could not be rushed by the direct heat of the sun, which would make the bark brittle and rob it of its essential oils. Instead, it was a slow, gentle dehydration, allowing the air to work its magic. As the bark dried, a transformation occurred. The pale strips began to curl inward, each one rolling into a tight, slender scroll. The pale tan color deepened into a warm, reddish brown, the color of autumn leaves and rich, fertile earth. Several of these fine, paper-thin layers were then carefully placed one inside the other, creating a layered quill, a compact and elegant form that would protect the fragile spice on the long journey that lay ahead. This was cinnamon as the world would come to know it. Not a simple shaving of bark, but a meticulously crafted object, the product of immense patience and ancestral knowledge. For now, however, its journey was only just beginning. It rested in the quiet of the drying hut, its scent filling the warm air, waiting for the first of many hands that would carry it across the world. The first movements of the cinnamon were small and local. From the forested hills of the island's interior, the fragrant quills, now bundled and wrapped in leaves and cloth, would begin their slow descent towards the coast. They might be carried on the backs of men who walked well-worn paths that wound through the dense green landscape, their footsteps a steady, rhythmic beat against the earth. The air around them would be alive with the sounds of the forest, the chatter of unseen monkeys, the call of a brightly colored bird, the persistent hum of insects. The journey was not measured in hours or miles, but in the rising and setting of the sun, a slow and steady progression towards the sea. As the paths widened, the bundles might be transferred to the backs of oxen, yoked to sturdy wooden carts. The creak and groan of the cart's wheels became the new rhythm of the journey, a slow, patient sound that accompanied the spice as it left the deep shade of the forest and entered the open, sun-drenched landscapes of the lowlands. Here, the world was one of sprawling rice paddies, their brilliant green a startling contrast to the dark forest canopy, and groves of coconut palms that swayed gently in the sea breeze. The scent of the cinnamon now mingled with the salty tang of the approaching ocean. Finally, the spice would arrive at one of the island's small, natural harbors. These were not grand ports with stone jetties and towering lighthouses, but quiet coves and estuaries where the sea met the land in a gentle embrace. Here, local fishing boats, with their distinctive outriggers, were drawn up on the sand, their sails furled. The air was thick with the smell of salt, of drying fish, and of the cinnamon itself, which was now being unwrapped and prepared for the next stage of its journey. In these coastal settlements, the first real trade would take place. The men who had brought the cinnamon down from the hills would meet with merchants, men whose faces were turned not towards the land, but towards the vast blue expanse of the sea. These merchants were the first gatekeepers, the first link in a chain that would eventually stretch halfway across the world. The negotiations were unhurried, a dance of offer and counteroffer conducted in the shade of a palm-thatched roof. There was no shared currency, so the trade was one of barter. The cinnamon quills, so light and fragrant, were exchanged for things of the sea: dried fish for sustenance, beautiful cowrie shells that served as a form of currency, or perhaps salt, painstakingly evaporated from the ocean water and essential for preserving food. Once the bargains were struck, the cinnamon was carefully loaded onto larger vessels, ships designed not just for coastal fishing, but for crossing the open water. These were simple, sturdy crafts, their hulls made of planks sewn together with coconut fiber rope and sealed with natural resins. They carried a single, large sail, woven from palm leaves, designed to catch the predictable winds of the monsoon. As the bundles of cinnamon were stowed in the hold, they were packed alongside other treasures of the island, precious gemstones like sapphires and rubies, unearthed from the island's rivers, and perhaps even pearls, harvested from the oyster beds in the shallow coastal waters. With the cargo secure, the sailors would wait. They watched the sky and the sea, reading the subtle signs of nature that told them when the winds would be favorable. There was no impatience in their waiting. They understood that the ocean could not be commanded, that a successful voyage was a matter of cooperation with the great unseen forces of the world. And then, one day, the wind would shift. A steady, reliable breeze would begin to blow from the southwest, rippling across the surface of the water. This was the signal. With quiet efficiency, the sailors would push their vessels off the sand, raise their woven sail, and steer their craft out of the calm waters of the harbor and into the gentle swell of the Bay of Bengal. On board, nestled in the dark of the hold, the cinnamon began its first sea voyage, leaving the shores of its birth and venturing out into the wider world, its destination the fabled Malabar coast of India. The island of its origin slowly faded into a hazy green line on the horizon, its secret scent now entrusted to the sea and the wind. The journey across the Bay of Bengal was a slow, rhythmic immersion in the vastness of the ocean. The ship, a small, organic thing of wood and fiber, moved with the water, rising and falling on the long, gentle swells. The only sounds were the creak of the ropes, the groan of the mast, the soft flap of the sail as it caught the wind, and the endless, soothing whisper of water parting around the hull. For the sailors, this was a world of profound simplicity. Their lives were governed by the sun, the stars, and the steady, benevolent pressure of the monsoon wind. By day, the sun beat down, its light reflecting off the water in a million dazzling points of light. The sailors, their skin weathered by years of sun and salt, moved about the deck with a quiet, practiced economy of motion. They tended the sail, adjusted the rudder, and scanned the horizon, not out of fear, but out of a deep and abiding familiarity. The sea was their home. They understood its moods, its colors, its immense and patient power. Sometimes a pod of dolphins would appear, their sleek bodies arching gracefully through the waves alongside the boat, their presence a joyful, fleeting companionship in the great blue emptiness. At night, the world was transformed. The heat of the day gave way to a gentle coolness, and the sky became a velvet dome of breathtaking clarity, strewn with stars so bright they seemed almost close enough to touch. With no land in sight, there was no light to pollute the darkness, and the constellations blazed with an intensity few people on land would ever witness. These stars were not just beautiful, they were a map, a compass. The sailors navigated by these ancient patterns of light, their knowledge of the heavens as deep and intuitive as their knowledge of the sea. They knew which stars would lead them west, their silent, glittering guidance a promise of landfall. Below deck, in the warm, dark hold, the cinnamon rested, its fragrance permeating the wooden planks of the ship. The scent, once confined to a forest, was now at sea, mingling with the smell of salt water, tarred rope, and the other goods packed alongside it. It was on a journey of its own, a passenger on a vessel moving between worlds. The days bled into one another, marked only by the changing light. There was no sense of urgency, only a steady, unhurried progress. The ship and its crew were a tiny, self-contained universe, moving at a pace dictated by the wind, in harmony with the natural rhythms of the planet. After many such days and nights, a change would be felt in the air. A new scent would drift across the water, the smell of land, of vegetation, of wood smoke. A faint, dark line would appear on the horizon, barely distinguishable from a low-lying cloud at first, but slowly, imperceptibly, growing clearer and more defined. This was the Malabar coast of India, a legendary land of spices, and the first major stop on the cinnamon's long journey. The ship would steer towards one of the coast's bustling port cities, places like Muziris or Calicut. As it drew closer, the single vessel would be joined by others, a growing traffic of ships of all shapes and sizes, their sails a patchwork against the green of the coastline. The calm of the open ocean gave way to the vibrant energy of the port. The ship would navigate through a maze of fishing boats and larger merchant vessels, finally dropping anchor in the sheltered harbor. The arrival was not chaotic, but an orderly process. Small boats would come out to meet the newly arrived ship, and the cargo would be carefully unloaded. As the bundles of cinnamon were brought out from the hold into the bright Indian sunlight, they entered a new world of commerce, a marketplace far larger and more complex than the simple coastal bartering of its island home. Here, in the great entrepot of the Malabar coast, the cinnamon would be bought and stored by powerful merchants, its value assessed and understood. It would rest for a time in a low, cool warehouse known as a go-down, its scent joining the heady perfume of the other spices for which this coast was famous. The sharp, pungent aroma of black pepper, the sweet, medicinal scent of cloves, and the warm, earthy fragrance of ginger. The cinnamon was no longer just a piece of bark from a forest tree. It was now a commodity, a player in the grand and ancient drama of the spice trade. Its quiet journey had brought it to a new, more complex world, a crossroads of cultures and commerce, from which it would soon embark on an even longer and more arduous voyage to the west. The next leg of the journey would be undertaken by a different people, in a different kind of ship. The merchants of the Malabar coast, having gathered the treasures of the East, would sell them to daring and skillful mariners who had mastered the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, the Arab traders. For centuries, these sailors had understood the secrets of the monsoon winds, not as two separate forces, but as a single, cyclical breath of the ocean. They knew that for one half of the year, the wind would blow steadily from the southwest, allowing for a swift passage to India, and for the other half, it would reverse, blowing from the northeast, providing a reliable return journey to the shores of the Arabian Peninsula. This knowledge was their power, the key that unlocked the wealth of the Orient. The ships they sailed were dhows, elegant vessels that were masterpieces of naval engineering, perfectly suited to their environment. Their hulls were stitched, not nailed, giving them a flexibility that could withstand the powerful ocean waves. They featured a distinctive triangular lateen sail, which allowed them to sail more effectively against the wind than the square-rigged ships of other nations. These were not just cargo vessels. They were beautiful, graceful craft, their high, curved prows cutting cleanly through the water. The loading of the dhow was a carefully supervised process. The cinnamon, now a highly prized commodity, was packed alongside black pepper, cloves from the Moluccas, ginger, and cardamom. These precious spices were stowed deep in the hold, protected from the elements. The ship also carried other luxuries: fine silks from distant China, translucent porcelain, and fragrant sandalwood. When the dhow was fully laden and the northeast monsoon began to blow, it would weigh anchor and set a course west, across the immense open waters of the Arabian Sea. This voyage was longer and more daunting than the crossing of the Bay of Bengal. The ship would sail for weeks out of sight of land, a tiny speck of wood and sail on a seemingly endless ocean. The rhythm of life aboard the dhow was one of patient routine and deep faith. The day was structured around prayers, the sailors turning towards Mecca 5 times a day, their devotions a constant in the ever-shifting world of the sea. They were masters of celestial navigation, steering by the sun during the day and by the stars at night. They had their own names for the constellations, their own stories written in the night sky, a celestial map passed down from father to son. The captain, or Nakuda, was a figure of immense authority and respect. He was not just a sailor, but a merchant, a navigator, and a leader. He bore the responsibility for the ship, its crew, and its precious cargo. He made his decisions based on a lifetime of experience, reading the color of the water, the shape of the clouds, and the behavior of seabirds to predict the weather. The journey was largely peaceful, a long, meditative glide across the sea, powered by a wind that was, for the most part, a steadfast friend. The sailors would pass the time mending sails, telling stories, and chanting songs, their voices a low, melodic murmur against the constant sound of the wind and waves. As on the previous voyage, the days would blur into a seamless passage of time, a slow and steady transit between one continent and another. Below deck, the cinnamon continued its patient journey, its subtle fragrance a constant reminder of the distant, misty island where it had grown. The air in the hold was a potent tapestry of scents, a concentrated essence of the wealth of the East. After many weeks at sea, the first signs of the journey's end would appear. The deep blue of the open ocean would lighten to a turquoise hue, a sign of shallower waters. The lookout would spy the coast of Africa or the southern shores of the Arabian Peninsula, a welcome sight after the unbroken horizon of the sea. The dhow would navigate towards a port like Kana in modern-day Yemen or Mocha, a bustling harbor that served as the gateway to the next stage of the spice route. As the dhow sailed into the harbor, it would be greeted by a familiar scene of activity. The anchor would be dropped, the great sail furled, and the process of unloading would begin. When the bundles of cinnamon were once again brought into the sunlight, the light was different, the air drier, the sense of the land more arid and spare. The spice had crossed the great ocean. It had traveled from a world of monsoon forests and tropical humidity to a world of desert sands and dry, searing heat. It was now in Arabia, the land of frankincense and myrrh, a place that for centuries had been the bridge between the East and the West. Here, the cinnamon would be prepared for the most arduous part of its journey yet, the slow, deliberate trek across the vast, silent deserts of the north. In the dusty, sun-baked ports of southern Arabia, the cinnamon underwent another transformation, not in its substance, but in its mode of transport. The sea voyage was over. The creak of the ship's timbers and the call of the seabirds were replaced by a new set of sounds and rhythms. The precious cargo, so carefully protected from the ocean's spray, was now methodically transferred from the hold of the dhow to the back of the creature that was the master of the desert, the camel. This was the beginning of the overland caravan route, a journey as dependent on ancient knowledge as the sea voyage had been. The loading of the camels was an art form in itself. Each animal could carry a tremendous weight, but the load had to be perfectly balanced. The cinnamon, along with the other spices, silks, and exotic goods, was divided into smaller, manageable parcels, wrapped in thick cloth or leather to protect it from the relentless sun and the fine, pervasive sand of the desert. These bundles were then carefully secured to the wooden saddles that sat high on the camel's humps. A large caravan was a sight to behold, a living, breathing entity, a slow-moving river of life flowing through the seemingly lifeless landscape. It could consist of hundreds, sometimes even thousands, of camels, stretching for miles across the sandy plains. The caravan was a community on the move, comprising merchants, cameleers, guards, and guides. The guide was perhaps the most crucial member of all. He was a man of the desert, able to navigate not by charts and compasses, but by the position of the sun, the patterns of the stars, and an intimate, almost mystical understanding of the landscape. He knew the location of every well and oasis, the life-giving springs of water that were the essential, life-sustaining links in the chain of the desert route. The caravan moved at a slow, deliberate pace, the pace of the walking camel. The rhythm of the journey was hypnotic. The soft, padded footfalls of the camels made little sound on the sand. The only constant noises were the gentle, rhythmic clanking of bells that hung from the camels' harnesses, a sound meant to soothe the animals and keep the caravan together, and the low murmur of human voices. The journey was mostly undertaken in the cooler hours of the early morning and late afternoon. During the crushing heat of midday, the caravan would stop. The camels would be made to kneel, and the people would rest in the shade of temporary tents, conserving their energy for the miles ahead. The desert was a world of stark, minimalist beauty. By day, the sun beat down from a cloudless sky, and the heat created shimmering mirages on the horizon. The landscape was a palette of subtle colors: the pale gold of the sand dunes, the reddish-brown of the rocky outcrops, the deep, endless blue of the sky. It was a place of immense silence, a silence that could feel profound and meditative. The cameleers, who spent their lives crossing these empty spaces, were men of few words, their characters shaped by the vastness and austerity of their environment. Nights in the desert were magical. As the sun set, it painted the sky in fiery shades of orange, pink, and purple. The temperature would drop rapidly, and the air would become cool and crisp. The caravan would make camp near a well or in a sheltered wadi. Small fires would be lit, their flames flickering in the darkness, and the smell of roasting coffee and baking bread would fill the air. Above, the sky would be a spectacle of stars, more brilliant and numerous than they had appeared even over the open ocean. The merchants and cameleers would gather around the fires, sharing food, telling stories, and drinking sweet, strong coffee from small cups. In these quiet moments, under the vast, star-filled dome of the desert sky, the cinnamon rested, its long journey punctuated by these moments of profound peace. The caravan's route was an ancient one, the incense road, which for millennia had carried frankincense and myrrh from their source in southern Arabia to the markets of the Mediterranean. The cinnamon was now following this fabled path, its journey taking it past landmarks that were old even then. The route was not without its dangers. Shifting sands could obscure the path, wells could run dry, and there was always the threat of raids from desert tribes. But the caravans were well organized and often protected by armed guards, and the routes were so well established that the journey, though arduous, was a calculated and manageable risk. After weeks, sometimes months, of this slow and patient travel, the landscape would begin to change. The endless sand would give way to more solid, rocky ground. Signs of permanent settlement would appear. The caravan was approaching the great trading cities of the north, places like the legendary rock-carved city of Petra, or later, Damascus. As the caravan made its final approach, the weary travelers would see the green, irrigated fields and date palm groves that signaled the end of the desert. The journey across the sand was over. The cinnamon had been carried across another of the world's great natural barriers and was now poised to enter the orbit of a new civilization, the bustling world of the Roman Empire and, later, its Byzantine successor. Upon its arrival in the great cosmopolitan cities of the Levant, such as Alexandria in Egypt or, later, the mighty Constantinople, the cinnamon entered the final phase of its eastern journey. These cities were the hinges of the known world, the points where the trade routes of the East and West converged in a vibrant, multicultural nexus. The air here was different again, a complex blend of the desert's dry heat, the Mediterranean's salty breeze, and the scent of 1 million people from 100 different lands. The arrival of a great spice caravan was a significant event. It would not simply enter the city and disperse. Instead, it would proceed to a designated area, a caravanserai, or a specific market quarter where the trade was regulated and taxed by the ruling authorities, be they Roman, Byzantine, or later Arab. The camels, patient and enduring to the last, would be made to kneel one final time, and their precious burdens would be unloaded. The thick, dusty wrappings would be removed, and for the first time in many months, the cinnamon quills would be revealed, their fragrance perfuming the air of a new continent. In the shaded arcades of the spice markets, the final major transaction of the ancient trade route would take place. The Arab merchants, who had guided the spice across the ocean and the desert, would now meet the buyers from the west. In the early centuries, these buyers were Romans, their empire's appetite for luxury seemingly insatiable. Later, they would be shrewd and seafaring merchants from the Italian city-states of Venice and Genoa. The negotiations were sophisticated and conducted with a quiet formality. The Arab traders were masters of mystery. For centuries, they guarded the secret of the cinnamon's true origin. They spun fantastical tales to their Western counterparts to protect their monopoly and justify the astronomical prices they demanded. They spoke of cinnamon being found in the nests of giant birds, the mythical phoenix, built on inaccessible mountain cliffs. To harvest the spice, they claimed, one had to lure the birds away with large pieces of meat, and then scramble up the cliffs to steal the sticks from their nests. Another story told of cinnamon growing in a shallow lake guarded by fierce winged creatures. These stories, repeated by Greek and Roman historians like Herodotus, added to the spice's allure, shrouding it in an aura of danger, magic, and immense distance. The cinnamon was not just a flavoring, it was a fragment of a mythical world. The cinnamon quills would be carefully inspected by the Western buyers. They would assess their color, their aroma, the thickness of the bark, and the number of layers in each quill. The finest quality cinnamon was a luxury item on par with gold and precious stones. Once a price was agreed upon, payment would be made. The Romans paid in gold and silver coins, the currency of their vast empire, which flowed east in a steady stream in exchange for the luxuries it craved. The cinnamon was then transferred to the warehouses of the Venetian or Genoese merchants. Here, it was recorded in ledgers, its weight and value noted with meticulous care. The spice had passed from its final eastern guardians to its new western ones. It had been grown on an island shrouded in mist, carried across an ocean by monsoon winds, trekked across a desert on the backs of camels, and now it sat in a warehouse in a bustling Mediterranean port, waiting for the final sea voyage that would take it into the heart of Europe. Its journey had been one of slow, patient stages, each stage managed by a different culture, a different set of hands. From the forest harvester to the coastal trader, from the Indian merchant to the Arab sailor and the cameleer, each had played their part in this long and silent relay. Now, the final leg of the journey was about to begin, a passage across the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea. From the bustling, sun-drenched ports of Alexandria or Constantinople, the cinnamon began the last sea leg of its epic journey, this time in the hold of a European vessel. The ships of the Venetian and Genoese republics were the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean. They were larger and more robust than the Arab dhows, designed to carry heavy cargo and withstand the unpredictable and sometimes volatile weather of this enclosed sea. Great galleys, powered by both sail and oar, or later, sturdy, round-hulled cargo ships known as cogs, were loaded with the priceless spices. The cinnamon, now secured in crates and barrels to protect it on its voyage, was stowed alongside the other treasures acquired in the Levant. The hold of a Venetian spice ship was a treasury of scent and value. The sharp perfume of cloves, the bite of pepper, the warmth of nutmeg, and the sweet, woody aroma of the cinnamon itself. These were the scents of wealth, the foundation upon which the great mercantile empires of Venice and Genoa were built. With the cargo safely aboard, the ship would wait for favorable winds. The Mediterranean did not have the vast, predictable monsoon cycle of the Indian Ocean. Its winds were more localized and changeable, and the sailors who plied its waters needed a different kind of skill, one based on intimate knowledge of its currents, its islands, and its many capes and bays. As the ship pulled away from the dock and out into the open sea, the skyline of the eastern city, with its domes and towers, would recede into the distance. The vessel was now in a world of deep blue water and brilliant, clear light. The journey north and west across the Mediterranean was a voyage through the heart of the classical world. The ship might sail past the island of Crete, the cradle of the Minoan civilization, or navigate the straits between Sicily and the toe of Italy, with the smoking peak of Mount Etna visible in the distance. Life on board was disciplined and orderly. The Venetian state, in particular, ran its galley fleets with military precision. The captain was in absolute command, and the crew, a mix of free sailors and, on the galleys, oarsmen, worked in a highly structured environment. The rhythm of the voyage was marked by the changing of the watch and the steady, relentless work of managing the sails or pulling the heavy oars. For the cinnamon, resting in the darkness of the hold, it was another period of quiet transit, another passage of time, measured by the gentle rocking of the waves and the muffled sounds of the world above. The journey could take many weeks. The ships often sailed in convoys for protection, not just from pirates, who were a constant menace in certain parts of the sea, but also from rival trading states. Yet the primary feeling of the voyage was not one of fear, but of steady, purposeful progress. The ship was a self-contained world, a wooden island moving slowly but surely towards its destination. The sailors would watch for familiar landmarks, the islands and headlands that served as signposts on their maritime road. The sight of a particular coastline or the familiar shape of a distant mountain would be a comforting sign that they were on the correct course, that home was drawing nearer. Finally, after a long passage, a new and eagerly awaited sight would appear on the horizon. Not the low, sandy shores of Arabia or the green hills of India, but a unique and unmistakable vision. The skyline of Venice, rising like a dream from the waters of the lagoon. For the sailors and merchants, this was the culmination of their long and profitable venture. As the ship carefully navigated the channels of the lagoon, it would pass the smaller islands, the fishing boats, and the other merchant craft that thronged the waterways. The sounds of the city, the ringing of church bells, the cries of gondoliers, the distant murmur of the crowds in the Piazza San Marco would drift across the water to greet the returning vessel. The ship would be moored at the Riva degli Schiavoni, the city's grand waterfront, and the process of unloading would begin under the watchful eyes of the city's customs officials. The arrival of the spice fleet was a moment of immense importance for the entire city. The cinnamon, along with the pepper, cloves, and other spices, would be transferred to state-controlled warehouses, the Fondico. Here, its long journey across the world came to an end. It had reached its European gateway. In the cool stone warehouses of Venice, the cinnamon had found a temporary resting place. It had traveled from a small, shy tree in a misty forest to the heart of the most powerful commercial empire in Europe. It had been touched by many hands, bartered in many languages, and had crossed the world's greatest oceans and deserts. But its journey was not quite over. From Venice, it would now begin its final, slow dispersal into the towns, castles, and monasteries of medieval Europe, its fragrance about to perfume the dreams of a new world. From the magnificent warehouses of Venice, the cinnamon began the final, branching stage of its journey, a slow and patient diffusion into the heart of medieval Europe. The Venetian Republic held a tight grip on the spice trade, ensuring that every quill and peppercorn that passed into the continent did so on its terms and at its price. The city acted as a great filter and distributor, breaking down the vast bulk shipments from the east into smaller parcels destined for 1,000 different locations. The first part of this inland journey was often by water. The cinnamon, now sealed in smaller chests and sacks, would be loaded onto shallow-drafted barges that plied the rivers of northern Italy, such as the Po. From there, it would begin the arduous crossing of the Alps. There were no grand highways, only steep, winding, and often treacherous mountain passes. The spice was transferred to the backs of sturdy mules, sure-footed animals capable of navigating the narrow paths. A mule train, laden with precious spices, would snake its way slowly up the mountainsides, the sound of the mule bells echoing in the crisp, clean air. The pace was slow, dictated by the terrain and the weather. The merchants leading the train would spend their nights in fortified monasteries or hospices that offered shelter to travelers in these remote and challenging landscapes. Once over the Alps, the cinnamon entered the great river systems of northern Europe. It might be loaded onto boats that would carry it down the Rhine, past sleepy villages, terraced vineyards, and the imposing castles of feudal lords. Or it might travel down the Rhone, heading into the heart of France. Each stage of the journey involved new merchants, new taxes, and new hands. The price of the cinnamon grew with every mile it traveled from Venice, its value compounded by the difficulty and danger of its transport. It arrived finally in the bustling market towns of Germany, France, and England. Here, in the shadow of a great cathedral, merchants would set up their stalls. The cinnamon would be displayed alongside other exotic luxuries, saffron, ginger, and sugar, which was then considered a spice. Local apothecaries and the stewards of great households would come to make their purchases. The amount they bought would seem minuscule to us today, not pounds, but mere ounces, or even fractions of an ounce, carefully weighed on delicate brass scales. The cinnamon was not primarily for the common person. Its immense cost made it a symbol of wealth and status, a way for the nobility and the rich merchant class to display their affluence. A pinch of cinnamon dusted onto a custard or mulled into wine at a great feast was a sign of prestige. It spoke of a connection to a distant, almost magical world, a world of crusaders, pilgrims, and faraway lands. But it was not used only for its flavor. In the medieval mind, the distinction between food and medicine was blurry. Spices, with their potent aromas and exotic origins, were believed to have powerful medicinal properties. Cinnamon was prized for its warming and stimulating qualities. Physicians and monastic herbalists, relying on the ancient texts of Galen and Dioscorides, prescribed it for a host of ailments, from coughs and colds to digestive troubles. It would be ground into a fine powder and mixed into medicinal syrups, poultices, and aromatic concoctions intended to ward off illness, which was often believed to be carried on bad air or miasma. The fragrant scent of cinnamon was thought to purify the air and protect against disease. In the quiet infirmary of a monastery, a monk would carefully grind a cinnamon quill with a mortar and pestle. The rhythmic, gentle sound, a soft counterpoint to the distant chanting from the chapel. The warm, comforting scent would fill the small, cool room. The cinnamon also found its way into the church itself. It was sometimes blended with frankincense and myrrh to be burned as incense during solemn religious ceremonies. Its sweet, spicy smoke would rise to the vaulted ceilings of the great Gothic cathedrals, its fragrance intended to honor God and lift the souls of the faithful towards heaven. And so, the journey that began with a quiet ritual in a distant forest found its quiet culmination in 1,000 different moments across a continent. It ended in the warmth of a spiced drink on a cold winter's night in a drafty English castle. It ended in the comforting scent of a medicine being prepared in a French monastery. It ended in the subtle flavoring of a festive dessert served in a wealthy Florentine home. The long, silent, and extraordinary journey was complete. The small, unassuming piece of bark had traveled across the entire known world, passed through the hands of a dozen cultures, and had finally delivered its gift of fragrance and flavor, a whisper of the warm, misty, and faraway island where its story first began. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a gentle close. The echoes of the past now fade, leaving behind only stillness and quiet. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. You are safe and surrounded by calm. May your rest be deep and your dreams be peaceful. If this story brought you comfort tonight, a quiet click of the like button helps others find this little space of calm. And to ensure our paths cross again for another journey, a gentle tap on subscribe will let you know when the next story is ready for you. Your support is deeply appreciated. But for now, all that is left to do is drift. Sleep well.